Hi, this instructional video covers prose and poetry. And both of them get to use a fancy snancy little binder here. And the difference between the two is that prose is telling some sort of story, whereas poetry is poetry. Warning, modern poetry sounds a lot like prose. It doesn't have the whole rhyme, the end rhyme, and sometimes as a judge it's really hard to say, wow, that, is that a poem? That doesn't sound like a poem. Is that a poem? And they'll write on the ballot, this isn't a poem. And funny story about that, when I first started coaching, I had this kid doing this speech, this poem by Amy Lowell, who was poet laureate at one point in time, and it was called Number 3 on the docket. And so the first tournament we go to, the judge write, wow, this sounds more like a prose than a poem. So the next week we put her in prose instead of poetry, and that judge wrote, wow, it sounds like a DI instead of a prose. So the third week we put her in dramatic solo acting with it, and then we get a judge there that wrote, Amy Lowell is a poet. This is poetry. You should be in poetry. And so what you need to know as a judge is that these coaches know what they're doing. If they put it in poetry, then it's poetry. Don't question it. If they entered it in poetry, it is poetry. Don't write down, wow, this doesn't sound like poetry. They would not have put it in poetry if it was not poetry. So don't make that an issue. Now, with both of them, you have a binder, and the students need to treat this binder with respect. First of all, how they open it. That's part of it. Some kids are real sloppy, and they're like, ugh, right? They shouldn't hold it down. They should hold it up. And the page turns need to have two options. Either, if they don't want you to pay attention to the page turn, they should be talking to you, and then they turn the page, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And so those page turns are kind of invisible. And then sometimes they use the page turn to add emphasis. And so they'll look and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And it was painful. But the next day. And so they use the page turn as a transition. And that's a good thing. So, but if they need to make it visible, that's okay too. So you kind of pay attention. How are they using the page turns to the proper effect? The killer is when they're reading along and then they go da 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 da, and they make that page turn kill the whole flow of the story. That's bad. Forensics. In prose and poetry, they tend to be the most popular events, and they're the most competitive. So, it can be really difficult sometimes to decide, wow. And now we're getting back into the whole duet situation, is that some of the events will come in and they'll be funny, and some of them will come in and they'll be serious. And how do you judge a funny versus a serious? And you got to balance those two. And again, my answer is the same as it was in duet. You just go with your gut feeling. It's kind of like the Oscars, who's the best actor? Well, you can compare an actor from a funny movie versus an actor from a serious movie, and you just kind of go with your gut instinct. Also, another thing about prose and poetry is how often do they look up? Okay, they're supposed to be reading it, right? But if they practice it enough, they've got it memorized. And you can't blame a kid for having it memorized because they've just been practicing it. What I tell my students is that if there's an emotion, a strong emotion, they need to be looking at the judge. And if there isn't a strong emotion, they need to be reading it. So the two examples I give in my instruction is, we went to the grocery store and mother died. So, which one would you look up on? Well, it'd probably be, you would read, we went to the grocery store, mother died. It wouldn't be, we went to the grocery store, mother died. So, don't get hung up on, oh, this kid's got this thing memorized. If they completely ignore the binder, and the binder's down here, and they talk for several minutes without even looking at it, then ding them, okay? Then make it an issue. Otherwise, if they're looking at it and glancing at it every once in a while, don't vote against them. You know, for, oh, you have it memorized. Well, of course they got it memorized. They've been working on this thing for 2 months. Who wouldn't have it memorized? So don't make that an issue, okay? So, hope you enjoy it. That's pretty much it.